Hey guys, it's Jay, here with another review video. Before the review begins, I'd like to ask if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share with others. Without further ado, on to the vid. Let's begin by looking at the Kode Heads, excluding Hanjiro a bit as he will have his own section. First, Ross was able to prove Hanjiro is the mole through telling all the heads information regarding Kofi Akin, with each head being told a different location that he would be protecting, and Hanjiro's location being the only one that was leaked. This of course proves Hanjiro is the mole, as Ross told them this information several days prior to this meeting. And if we assume it's the max amount of time for several, that would be 5 days for Hanjiro to relay this information to Baal and his men. But since it did occur several days ago, the location Hanjiro was told was likely attacked in that time, which is how Ross would know which of the heads betrayed them prior to the meeting. Since this leaked information does relate to Kofi, I do want to talk about him as well here. We were told in the episode he would be protecting government officials, and back in September, Brent put out an image on his Instagram of Kofi with his hand Sonya, seemingly on a train. With this new information, we can guess they are likely on their way to the facility with the actual government officials, and they will either be attacked on their way there or when they actually arrive. Now, the next bit of information could be considered a spoiler, so if you would like to avoid knowing this, go ahead and skip to the timestamp I have on the screen. For everyone that stayed, a while back, Brent did a stream on Twitch with a small Q&A portion near the end where he mentioned doing an ORDEAL movie. At the time, we thought this would be in relation to the royals, as that's what the question that spawned the movie answer was in relation to.
We see the royalty this season here and there, yeah. I've like this idea of like the end of the season, kind of like a movie. You know, at the end of a season, they usually release a movie in like anime and stuff. So I have that idea for like when the season is over to release like 3 episodes that are like just one large episode split up into 3 parts. And I'll call it like the ORDEAL movie.
However, I did ask Brent if he was still doing that idea, and what I have on screen was his answer. This means the info in this episode is supposed to help us transfer over to Kofi's eventual fight, with that fight lasting about 3 to 4 episodes. He does say it's supposed to end off the season, but I have a hard time believing that, as with episode 150's release, we are only at 38 episodes for the season. And since Brent is trying to keep the season at 50 total episodes, this fight will either be longer than what was said in the message, or more things unrelated to Kofi will be a part of the season before it actually ends. Brent also mentioned the fight focusing on the God tier versus a Gaki, which was to be expected as they are the only characters who can really contend with them, but the Gaki themselves were also seemingly made for that very purpose anyway. And at the end, Brent does say the plan for this fight is to show strength levels are planetary. How he will do this is unknown to me, but we do know of Kevin's star level feat from the end of season 2, as well as Shay's moon level feat from this season. So maybe Brent will do a mix of implications and actual showcases that reveal the God tier and related characters are on that planetary level of scaling. Moving on, I would like to focus on the Kode Heads and how they seem to operate in combat, and I will be using moments from episode 107 to further enhance my analysis, as that is the only other time we see the Kode Heads in combat. Starting with Galliard, as Hanjiro says, he is their shield in their first line. This is evident as he is the first to attack Hanjiro in this episode, and not simply out of frustration, but because that's his role. He also does the same against Goro. This episode and 107 shows Galliard will throw out one punch to activate his talent, and this is likely done as a sort of metric to determine how strong their opponent actually is, as Galliard's talent, Grand Templar's Vow, will increase or decrease his own strength to match his opponent. So depending on how strong he gets will determine how much effort the others will need to put in. He also acts as their shield, as he is now technically the only member who directly compares to that of their opponent, and like a shield, he should be able to endure most of what is thrown at him. He also displays what Hanjiro calls his fatal combat form, a form that grants him sharper claws and teeth. In my opinion, this form proves Galliard has some capacity to control how his talent makes the fight even. Hanjiro knows of the form, which means Galliard has used it before, and Hanjiro, before he disappears, understands that he was never going to have a trial, and this is why Galliard chose to use that form, as it is likely his most lethal, so he is actively choosing to try and kill Hanjiro in this moment. With this added context, looking back at episode 107, it makes sense why Galliard sprouted extra arms. Galliard's goal in this episode is to harm Hanjiro, but his goal then was to simply keep Goro in place, which allowed Avalon time to separate the heads from all the other troops. So instead of going for something more lethal, he desired his talent evolve his body to fit a more restrictive oriented objective. This episode also does a good job of showing how even the fight can become when Grand Templar's vow is activated, as the fatal combat form allowed him to be very even with Hanjiro physically. However, his talent doesn't seem to provide a direct counter or even match for his opponent's abilities, as he could do nothing when Hanjiro paralyzed him. Moving on, Marina and technically Hanjiro would make up the Kode Heads' second line. As expressed against Goro, they move in after Galliard. Looking strictly at Marina, her talent gear Gyodin allows her to be highly mobile and highly offensive, as she can increase the gears of her feet, allowing her to move faster, and she is likely the fastest Kode Head because of this. The rotation of her feet, along with the heat they can produce, allows her to be more lethal than even Galliard, as the simple nature of her talent allows damage to more easily occur when she makes contact with her opponent. However, this episode does show that she is not the most mentally sound, for lack of a better term, as her thoughts regarding the situation at hand do not allow her to react as fast as she realistically could, thus leading to her quick elimination. Before we look at Nico, I'm going to leave this comment from Faceless right here for comedic purposes. Now that we've all had a good laugh, Nico's role in combat is far different from her comrades, as she doesn't technically have one. All she does is bring the Kode Heads to where they need to be, and if Ordained Judgment is going to be used, place each head in their position. She has expressed zero combat capabilities, and Hanjiro even says without offensive capabilities, she is of no threat. This means she is genuinely useless during any combat exchange, which is a pretty sad realization, as she comes from one of the strongest clans in the series, and every other member we've seen has had some form of combat capabilities, even the human Private Johan. We've even seen Nico training alongside Sabito when they were kids in episode 71, so it's a bit odd she has zero swordsmanship capabilities as well. That wouldn't be bad if she was similar to Kaguya, a Heart Clan member who doesn't use a sword, but his hands instead. If she did use a sword, she'd be more akin to Bonnie, who mixes a portal with her sword by simply thrusting it into the portal, allowing for a surprise stab. In Nico's case, it could be more sporadic teleportation of not just her, but her sword as well. Just imagine if she went to swing her sword but teleported it so it came with the same force at a different angle. Now, if she isn't going to be an offensive combatant, she should at least be able to lean more into her support role and help keep her comrades safe by teleporting them away into an advantageous position. But of course, in this episode, she doesn't do anything. Another Kode Head who isn't as combat oriented would be Joanne, and the reason she's not directly combat oriented is because she is Kode's source of wealth. However, this does not diminish what she could actually do, as in 107 her talent allows her to damage Goro with ease and help keep him in place, so in combat she would have a more range oriented binding and restricting role. Though, like Marina in this episode, she isn't prepared for the situation at hand and doesn't do anything to aid the others, nor defend herself, which could be possible if Hanjiro's projectiles wouldn't go through her diamond shards, though that is up for debate. This leads us into Aldrich Ross's role. As a chairman, he is their leader, and as such moves his comrades around like chess pieces to positions that aid their goal, which is exactly what he does in 107, asking each of the other heads to do what fits their roles best. But in this episode, instead of directing his comrades, he tries to keep them safe using his seals. He first attempts to hold Hanjiro in place with a binding seal, a seal designed to perfectly match Hanjiro's chi. It seems this seal's success relies on Aldrich actually knowing the exact amount of chi his target has, which is why the moment Hanjiro's chi increases, the seal no longer works. Due to the binding seal no longer being effective, Aldrich opts for a time-slowing seal instead, which seems to slow the times of physical things within the radius. But this was also ill-effective, as it seems as though the seal cannot slow the time of things made from raw chi, which is what Hanjiro's projectiles should be made of. This is when Aldrich decides to use a shielding seal to protect he and Joanne. I feel as though this would work normally if he was blocking anything other than the projectile Hanjiro fired. Going back to the chess piece analogy from earlier, it doesn't just apply to the other heads, but to anyone who has a part in Aldrich's plan, whether they know it or not. Minamoto would be an example, as he was assigned to try and take Hanjiro's head, barring the fallout of the situation. He's also there to help prove Aldrich's hypothesis on the enemy having a means of recalling those infected with Veil's blood. Ian and Brandon would be an example from season 2, as Aldrich wanted Brandon to suggest bringing the life box to Trinidad to destroy it, so he could place it in the care of Ian, a man he assumes would use the serum in the box on himself, which would allow the serum to either go to waste if Ian dies, or Aldrich's desired outcome of Ian becoming a Kimyo. Now we can take a look at the highlight of the episode, Hanjiro Heavy himself. First, the increase to his chi has provided us with a talent description update. His talent of Lion Gauntlet is now a creation and kinesis type. Hanjiro can manifest his chi into pure gold, internally or externally. He molds this gold into the Lion Gauntlets, Lion right hand and Lioness left hand, both having specific properties. Lion produces powerful paralyzing roars that stun while disrupting internally. Lioness produces precision projectile bites, which are aimed at vital points, piercing through Kimyo defensive techniques. Looking at the description from top to bottom, we see Hanjiro's talent also falls into the kinesis type, and this comes from the fact he can produce his gold internally. He mentioned that he stores gold within his body as it grants him internal protection, which you could akin to an internal version of the rock armor technique, allowing him to better protect his organs. The gold he produced internally also allowed him to conceal the blood Veil had given him, which also shows the kind of control Hanjiro has over his talent. Because Hanjiro had concealed the kinesis aspect of his talent, I am also of the opinion he has had the orb next to his heart for quite some time. And I don't just mean since the start of the series, but potentially for even longer. I feel it's somewhat okay to speculate this as we are learning new things about a character who in the story has been lying to the people he was close to for years. Part of this would rely on Veil knowing his blood can increase the chi limit of Kimyo's far before we see it in the series. But let me walk you through my thought process. Hanjiro's talent at a base would allow him to form his chi into pure moldable gold, whether that be internally or externally. He would then choose to do it externally with the Lion Gauntlets, which is how the talent would be given its name. At this time, the gauntlets wouldn't have any properties, but after meeting Veil and devising a plan for Hanjiro to join the Kode Heads, blood would be given to him, which is how the gauntlets would have gotten the effects we saw from his original description. The rest of the blood would then be concealed in the golden orb we saw next to Hanjiro's heart. Due to Hanjiro's explanation regarding how gold affects Veil's blood, it isn't far-fetched to say that concealing the blood in an orb would limit how much it would have affected him initially, which is why the gauntlets have the added properties they do now and didn't have them before. Though if you disagree with this thought process, I understand, as it's just as easily possible to say Hanjiro hasn't had the orb in his body for that long, and the initial properties his gauntlets held were how they operated the entire time. Continuing on with the description, we can now look at the gauntlets themselves. Hanjiro uses the Lion Gauntlet against Galliard, and of course we see it still has its paralyzing property, but can also disrupt internally. The definition of disrupt is to break apart or rupture, and the definition of rupture is the tearing apart of tissue. So the Lion Gauntlet can not only paralyze you, but when it does, you will also be suffering internal damage. And this is why after Hanjiro paralyzes Galliard, we see blood coming from his eye and mouth. Unrelated to the Lion Gauntlet's properties, Hanjiro does exhibit a relatively good strength feat with it, when he is able to send Galliard away with one actual hit. And this is impressive due to Galliard's frame compared to Hanjiro's, as well as Galliard now technically being directly comparable to Hanjiro's strength. Hanjiro then uses the Lioness Gauntlet on Marina and Aldrich, and while it still has its precision bites that are aimed at vital points, said bites are now in the form of a chi projectile. When the description says aimed at vital points, it means that very literally. As before, it could have been implied that Hanjiro has to do the aiming when he attacks, but this episode shows that's not the case, as he's not even looking in the direction Marina is in, yet the gauntlet fires and hits her in a vital area, which means the gauntlet itself should be able to automatically target a vital area before Hanjiro chooses to fire the projectile. The projectile itself is also a strong offensive option, as it was said to pierce through Kimyo defensive techniques, which is why it can break through Aldrich's shield seal like it was nothing. This ability is genuinely insane, as it should imply it can bypass the rock armor technique or something like Rokash's golden armor, as well as barrier techniques like Eric's wall or Andrea's valiant shield that she uses with Alistair. We also see that Hanjiro is able to manipulate the gold of his gauntlets after they've already been formed, as we see him form the additional elbow blade on Lioness that he used to damage Galliard with. And this also explains why in episode 107 he shows up with the elbow blades on the gauntlets, but then why they weren't present when he faces Goro. This additional gold manipulation should mean he can form other things out of gold or added things onto the gauntlets themselves. Hanjiro also tells Aldrich that his gold gains several properties due to Veil's blood, and if we go by the max definition of several, as well as include the properties the gauntlets already have, there could be one more property Hanjiro has yet to showcase. We could also say it's possible several isn't an accurate word to use, and that Hanjiro could have half a dozen to a dozen additional properties he has yet to display. Lastly, in regards to Hanjiro, let's look at his connection to Veil. First, I assume Veil tasked Hanjiro with joining Kode as a mole, which he could only do effectively if he were one of its leaders, as he would have access to information that others would not, such as the life and death box's existence. However, this episode also implies Hanjiro was trusted with taking care of Kode from the inside as opposed to the outside like the rest of Veil's men, as he says only he and few others know of the Kode Head's weaknesses, with Veil and Thanatos likely being some of those people. So if Hanjiro was able to cripple the leaders of the Grand Kimyo organization, that would make dealing with the rest of the Kimyos who side with Kode much easier to deal with, as like the saying goes, cut off the head of the snake and the body will follow. Now even though Hanjiro is on Veil's side, the very nature of his talent makes him a potential counter to the Blood Monarch, the same way Rokash's gold makes him a counter, and this is because of how pure gold interacts with Veil's cells, as it can nullify and neutralize the effects of them. The nullification has shown up when Rokash was struck by Veil when he was younger, as these cells within his blood blade did not cause the damage they were intended to, as normally they would begin eating cells from the inside out, but when in contact with Rokash's armor, it's as if Veil's cells never existed, which is why Veil says Rokash's gold has saved him. The neutralization of Veil's blood has shown up in this episode, as Hanjiro's gold was keeping the effects of Veil's blood from occurring through the constant contact that they had with each other. This is also why Veil was avoiding contact with Rokash's armor, as contact with it would weaken his talent overall. Keeping Veil's blood on subject, this episode confirms that the DNA in Dr. Hanzo's orb also contains Veil's blood, which is how they are able to recall the Gaki and Hanjiro. Veil's blood and Kaguya's teleportation ability were mixed together to create the orb. This effectively replicates Kaguya's ability to teleport individuals when he touches them, but specifies it to who has Veil's blood, though this wouldn't fully explain how Dr. Hanzo is able to teleport specific individuals and not everyone in their entirety. So to circumvent this, he would need the DNA of each person who will be recalled, as DNA is specific to the individual, and that would allow him to target the specific Kimyos. So the orb should work like this. Kaguya's teleportation talent connects to Veil's blood. Veil's blood then connects to all of the individuals who have his blood flowing through their body. The blood they have is then innately connected to their own DNA. Through this connection, Dr. Hanzo can use the orb to recall specific individuals as if he were touching them himself, as he is effectively picking the source of DNA he wants to teleport. For those that need a comparison, think of how during the war arc in Naruto, Minato connected his chakra to that of Naruto's, whose chakra was already connected to that of every shinobi in the war. Minato then used the Flying Raijin to teleport everyone outside of Obito's barrier, keeping in mind that Minato also had a Flying Raijin mark on Obito, yet did not teleport him outside the barrier. Our last and most brief subject will be regarding Rajani. Taking a look at more abilities she displays, through her being the essence of a living shadow, the damage she takes won't kill her, nor will she feel pain from her injuries. And from how it seems after she is cut in half by Shay, she can use her shadow in the ground to reconstitute herself, as it looked like she was going to use it to reform her legs. However, it may seem as though she cannot be permanently damaged, but this episode shows two instances where she bleeds, and in my opinion, Shay did this by damaging her through her shadow, likely using Zahara's natural ability to exist in a shadow to do so. Since Zahara exists in her chosen wielder's shadow, she likely has a natural ability to interact with shadows in a similar manner, which is why she can be thrown partially into Rajani's shadow, and Rajani took damage from this because part of her body actually exists in the shadow. This is also why Shay can use his ability to recall Zahara to his advantage, as recalling Zahara while Rajani is connected to Shay's shadow allows the blade to easily connect to Rajani, allowing her to be damaged through her shadow once more. This leads me into two abilities she displays at the same time. The first is that she can connect her shadow to another person's, allowing her to resurface exactly where they are from wherever she is. The second would be her implication of being able to control all non-Kimyo shadows within the area she is at, as the shadow under Shay is larger than what Rajani's is normally. It's possible she can do this innately, but you can also argue that her being able to do this comes from her simply attaching her shadow to the other shadows as well. To end this off, I really enjoyed the constant image of the hostile chi warning, as it adds to the seriousness of the situation, and as much as I don't like how Anton has been sidelined and overlooked this season, I do appreciate the fact he wasn't involved in this situation, as I feel it's more impactful to the other Kode Heads, but it also gives one of the god tier a chance to show off more of themselves, as now we know Minamoto will make a sword of smoke, and Anton being present likely would make this situation have not that many stakes. Something I finally realized while typing the script but had no real place to put it was that the reason Grand Templar's vow activated in season 2 when Galliard shook Shay's hand was due to the innate chi of his body, and this makes me wonder how Galliard would have adapted to such a large amount of chi. I do also like that this episode helps highlight the fact that hiding aspects of your talent will give you an advantage over others. This episode also makes you wonder if all of the Kode Heads Hanjiro dealt a blow to will die. Considering this season is supposed to have a lot of death, I feel like it makes sense for Marina and Galliard to actually be dead, but Aldrich I'm not so sure about. Him dying here would be slightly hollow for the leader of Kode, not to mention we don't know if he has an heir to pass his talent on to. I personally assume he does, but I also think he may have a way to live, at least for a short while longer, through a sort of healing or rejuvenation seal. I also wanted to mention that I do think it's a really good idea if Brant were to put out some canon ORDEAL movies, kind of like a singular long episode one-shot that focuses on one or two characters at past points in time that helps fill in some of the missing details the series has. And lastly, this episode greatly affirmed why I like Hanjiro as opposed to Nico, who is genuinely useless outside of transporting people around. And for the comments of the week, I would like to put a spotlight on two comments, both coming from Acidic Octopus. The first comment mentions the difference in power between a god tier and a Kode Head, which is something I didn't mention during the video, but Minamoto was very close to actually finishing Hanjiro off with no real effort on his part. Even 3 of his smoke soldiers actually damaged him before he was recalled. The second comment mentions Veal's gift of blood also granting his weakness to gold. Now, this doesn't make sense to me, as nothing in this episode implies that's the case at all. As if this were the case in any capacity, after the chi enhancement, Hanjiro should have been weakened by his own talent, and we know something like that is possible, as Cass wasn't even resistant to his own explosives. So a similar thing should have happened here. But because Hanjiro is able to take out 3 of his former comrades, especially the most physically capable one, I wouldn't say he's weaker or being hindered by any means. Maybe there's something I missed and someone can try and explain it to me in the comments. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know your favorite part of the chapter was in the comments below, as well as how you feel about the things I mentioned throughout the video. Don't forget to read the actual episode for yourself and be sure to like it as well, and I will see y'all in the next one.